Start with my name. My name's Marcus. I work for Nuffield Health, have done for the last 7 years. And I started off Nuffield Health as a physiologist. I'm sure that many of you in this room have at some point had a health assessment, possibly with Nuffield Health. And if it was anywhere within the St Albans, London or surrounding areas, I might have even delivered that health assessment. So I actually want to take you back and tell you a little story that is the birth of where data kind of comes into meaning to myself. And it's on the day of my interview to become a physiologist. So as part of the interview, it's a whole day's process. And as part of that process, you're actually competing against other people for that same role. And we were given a group task, given a load of data with different ages, lifestyle factors like smoking status, exercise habits, sleep, stress, nutrition. And our task was we had to put together an innovative intervention for disease prevention. Okay? So naturally, I thought, well, looking at this data, I'm going to pick a particular age group and look at what is the most significant risk factor that they're facing and create an intervention for that group. And I thought, what a great idea, Marcus. Let's share that with the group. Let's work together. Shared the idea, and they disagreed. They actually thought that we shouldn't leave anybody out. We should put it together, an intervention that is inclusive of all ages and all lifestyle factors. And I struggled with that. You know, I'm in an interview process. I'm being assessed. There's people around me looking at how we're conducting ourselves. I'm thinking I probably shouldn't bring out the Welsh fiery debating side of me. I probably should just go with the flow. So, okay, well, why don't we go for a vote? Let's see what people think. And of course, everybody voted against me, and we decided to put together an intervention that suited all ages. So we then had to present our intervention to the group that were assessing us, the same people that were in the room at the time. And as soon as we delivered the presentation, we're all standing there, you know, nervously, waiting for the questions. And first question comes up. Guys, I've noticed that you haven't actually picked a specific age group and a specific lifestyle factor to focus on for your intervention. Don't you think that's going to be a bit more challenging to engage with that population? And I'm standing there thinking, oh, this is a bit awkward, because they definitely heard me saying that. But of course, I was a team player, and I stepped forward and I said, well, we discussed it as a group, but we agreed to not exclude anybody from the intervention. So I obviously won the points, and I got the job. So clearly, using data in the wrong way can result in poor interventions. So the whole point of this presentation today is to talk about how we can use data to create interventions that actually help us to have better, more meaningful outcomes. Okay. So what I wanted to do is have a look at companies that, you know, are known for being great places to work before we start getting into the data concept and employee outcomes. So of this list up on screen, I'll just pick out 2 or 3 and just pick out some of the highlights of things that I thought were quite, you know, unique about why they're great places to work. And if you've ever looked into these companies before yourself, you probably would have seen a few of these. So Facebook, for a start, they have gourmet chefs on site, on campus. You get free food all day, every day. Brilliant. You can cycle around campus. If your bike breaks down, you take it into the repair shop, and all you have to do is pay for parts. You don't have to pay for labor. Brilliant. You can have your haircut for free. There's even a music room to go and, you know, be creative just during a shift to, you know, get those creative juices flowing. And of course, you can't be penalised for being on Facebook at work. So a bit of a perk for some. Google, though, I think is my favourite. So Google does all the things that Facebook does. And also they have things like laundry for free. You can go and get your car washed and oil change for free as well. Pretty useful. But the one that stood out for me is that you can actually rent on campus a private cabin to spend quality time with a loved one. So one of the perks, you know, of working for Google. And then innocent, smaller scale, similar concept. You know, they focus on creating a culture that is nice to be working in. They're trying to bring the home place into the workplace. They have in their head office, or in one of their offices in London, they have the baby wall, where everybody that works in the office has got a picture of them as a baby up on the wall. So everybody starts in the same place. And in terms of the departments, no, there isn't a finance department that sits with finance, and there isn't a marketing that sits with marketing. They all kind of sit wherever they want to sit, just to kind of fester that, you know, the culture of a nice place to work. So running with that theme of using, you know, data and focusing on employee outcomes and, you know, ultimately to improve health, I thought that was a nice place to start. But now when we look at the actual initiatives that companies provide, if you look at Britain's Healthiest Workplace, they, you know, have a look at what initiatives are being provided by employers. And they've actually found that on average, there's 30 initiatives available to employees, of which only 10 of them people actually are aware of, and of those, only 3 of them are actually being engaged with. So what this is telling me is that maybe we're trying to deliver an intervention that suits all, rather than spending time developing the smaller used interventions that actually are more meaningful and more beneficial. Okay? So again, a bit of a running theme with using data in the correct way. And I am a geek, I must admit. I'm a physiologist, I'm a scientist at heart. Doesn't matter where I go, I'm always looking for new information. And one of the things I've done is had a look at the history of data analysis and data measurement. Now, just as a show of hands, is anybody aware of how we used to measure distance before the invention of the ruler? Just by a show of hands. Okay, great, I'm going to blow some minds. Right, so it was the king's hand, okay, or the king's foot that was used as a metric for distance. Okay, and this wasn't this king specifically, I think it's just a well-known king that people can relate to. We're talking now, 3000 BC, ancient Egypt. So they would use the length of the hand or the length of the foot, which of course would be very problematic when the king dies and the next king comes into reign because all the measurements change. And actually in Egypt they used to use something called a cubit, which is where you have the length of the forearm, the hand and the palm, and that was a standard measurement. They then created the royal cubit, which was made into a granite kind of ruler, and that was a standard measurement value, and that's when construction started to flourish in Egypt. And it wasn't until 18th century in France that le meter was invented. And again, just a show of hands, this is just me to show my geeky side. Is anybody aware of what a meter actually represents? What's the yardstick of a meter? Show of hands if anybody knows? Okay, so it's a 1 to 10 millionth distance between the North Pole and the equator. Yeah, there's a pub quiz, a bit of information for you there. So yeah, that's what a meter represents, and we now have the ability to measure data and this standard measurements of data across all data sets, which allows us now to be more comparable with when we're looking at data sets. In the past, we would have struggled to do that, and actually now we have the opposite problem. Now we actually have so much data, we don't actually really know what to do with that data. It's estimated that 90% of all the data that's available in the world at the moment has been created in the last 2 years. That's huge. And obviously, when you think about it, you've got tablets, you've got your phones, and you've got devices that measure your steps. All of this data is being collected. Not all of it being used, but it's all being collected, and it's being stored somewhere. So the challenge we now have is, well, how do we know what data is useful? And how do we actually use that data to measure outcomes and to track improvements? So I want to try and give you a bit of a taster as to how we've done it in Nuffield, and also just kind of general concepts of how this can be applied to other areas. So again, another show of hands. This is a bit of a risky ploy now, because of the audience I'm talking to, I'm expecting there to be a lot of hands up. So by a show of hands, of your companies, which of you that you're aware track absence data or record absence data? Okay, good. Keep your hands up if you think that is good quality or accurate data. Okay, bit of a drop. And then keep your hands up if you use that data to inform well-being or health strategy. Okay, brilliant. Some hands still remain, and that's really good. But that is the minority. At the moment, we've got all this data that's available that just isn't being used to help inform strategy. So that brings you back to the 90% of data in the last 2 years. The data's available, we're just not really using it. And of course, there are other areas to collect data from. It's not just absence data. You also have the occupational health division, you have EAP, you have health assessments. All of those can contribute to being able to shape a well-being strategy. Collecting it is one thing, using it is obviously another. So we surveyed companies that have over 1,000 members of staff, and we found that 30% of them had absolutely no absence tracking in it at all, which is surprising for that scale of company. But also, if you think about actual absence data collection, one of the key reasons, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, reasons for absence or presenteeism is stress or mental health concerns. But actually, what we found is that many people won't report stress or mental health issues as a reason for absence, because there is still a taboo around that as a subject. So even if you did have an absence management system in place, again, accuracy comes into question. So we just need to explore those before we start looking at what actually has worked or what areas need to be improved. And of course, before you start thinking about how you can use health data, you need to think about what it is that you actually want to achieve. What is the reason for using the health data? Most of the time it is for financial benefit, reduce the spend on illness or presenteeism or staff turnover. Sometimes it is genuinely just to improve well-being in the workforce. If you look at places like Facebook and Google, that private cabin that you can rent out probably isn't measured as a metric. But the fact that it's provided goes to show that it is actually focusing on well-being rather than a financial outcome. The outcome itself is only relevant for you to be able to assess whether or not it's been effective. Why you're actually having a well-being strategy in place in the first place doesn't really matter. It's just understanding what it is you want to achieve that's important. One company that we were working with recently, a utilities company, they actually wanted to introduce physiotherapy for all of their workforce because they noticed that there was a lot of spend going into MSK. And rather than just taking that for face value, we actually wanted to understand what's the rationale behind wanting physiotherapy specifically. Of course, we do provide physiotherapy, but we want to understand the rationale behind it. And to be honest, there wasn't really any rationale other than we want to reduce the spend on MSK in our engineers. So then when we looked at the data in more depth and found actually there's more of an issue in the mental health division of their call centres. So rather than just providing physiotherapy to everybody, there was a cognitive behavioural therapist put in place in one of their key contact centres, and then physiotherapy was available to their engineers, which is where the issues were. And we found that then their objective was achieved, but through a smart strategy that applied to their workforce, rather than just giving one size fits all. So you can see how that story that I started with is coming back, full circle. So knowing your objectives is important. And I've already highlighted MSK, and I've already highlighted mental health. The reason why I've referred to both of those is because, as you know, if you look at Public Health England, if you look at CIPD data, if you look at even REBA's data, you'll find that often in the top 5 reasons for absenteeism or presenteeism, so being at work but not fully functional, you'll find that MSK and mental health issues are up there in the top 5. Estimated that it's costing 31 million days a year lost due to MSK issues. Now, MSK is a massive topic. We tend to think straight away of spinal health issues, but actually this could relate to issues with the ankles or the knees or the shoulders or the hands. And obviously, depending on the division or the manufacturing or the actual company that this applies to, can determine what the issue is. So, as another example, we found that there was a car manufacturer based in Swindon that had a particular issue with MSK. So we actually sent a physiotherapist there to have a look at the setup and have a look at the setting and why there was such an issue with the MSK. Rather than just providing an intervention, we went to actually understand what's causing the issue. And we found that as part of the manufacturing process, when you actually hang the door onto the car, there's a certain level of hammering that needs to take place to get the car in situ. And the physiotherapist identified that it was a specific movement that was causing ankle problems in the division. So they then put in place a process to have better supportive footwear and also to give movements on what to do regularly throughout the day to reduce that burden on the one ankle. And they found that the MSK issues dropped and therefore the spend on MSK dropped as well. So you can see that that's a great perfect example of, rather than just using the data and putting an intervention in place, it's going in and understanding what is it that's causing that issue. So yeah, of course, MSK being on the top priority, it's not as simple as just putting in place something that focuses on spinal health. There's many other areas that could be focused on. Coming back into mental health, interestingly, mental health and MSK issues are actually intrinsically linked. The system within the body that is responsible for relaying pain back to the brain is also linked to our internal fight or flight system. So when we're experiencing pain, our body is actually going through stress. So you can see how it's almost like chicken and egg, which one causes which. And I know there's probably some specialists in the audience that want to chirp up and say what they think. I've also got my opinions, but we'll leave the debate for afterwards. But in terms of the impact that it's having on the workforce, we're looking at 33 to 42 billion pounds spent on mental health in the UK, which that translates to about 1,200 to 1,500 pounds per employee. So we're not saying per employee that's ill, we're saying per employee. So significant cost when it comes to mental health. Interestingly, mental health and MSK are both things that can be remedied through cultural change in the workforce, but also individual change in the lifestyle choices they make. And of course, being a physiologist, I'm all about the lifestyle changes. So coming on to some of the data that we actually collect and we report back to corporate clients of ours, some of the top 3 things that always come up in conversation: alcohol consumption and exercise. So we found that on average, 4 in 10 are consuming too much alcohol, so more than 14 units per week. And only 9.2% of people are actually achieving the minimum recommended amount of exercise per week. That's 150 minutes. And only 2% of that are achieving the 300 minutes, which is the higher level physical activity to push your fitness to the next level. Now, of course, that's a low number. I'm sure there's people in here that, are part of that 9.2% and part of that 2%. But something as simple as just using a pedometer or just tracking steps has been found to not only increase participation in activity, but actually to reduce absence by 30%. And that was found in Britain's Healthiest Workplace report. And in addition to that, combining that pedometer with lifestyle coaching has found a 65% reduction in both red and amber flag health issues. So using the data in the right way and putting in interventions that are meaningful have been found to actually reduce absenteeism, therefore reduce spend, and of course, improve employee outcomes. So if we bring this all together, apologies if I've gone through that quite quickly, before we even start thinking about using employee data, we need to think about what it is that we're actually trying to achieve. What are the outcomes that we want to evidence back to whoever it is that's funding this? By doing that, you then help to shape what kind of data that you need to collect. It allows you to shape what kind of data is going to be meaningful to the outcomes. You can then help to use that data to inform decisions of what intervention should be put in place, and then come back and track that to see how effective it's been. Now, the best wellbeing strategy is one that changes based on the data. Rather than just staying stagnant and doing the same thing all the time, it's important to be dynamic, using the data to inform that. I think the future of health assessment delivery and health assessment provision is going to be centered around predictive analytics. So using risk algorithms to find out what are the areas that the person is at risk of before they even go in towards their intervention, so that they can then tailor-make an intervention that suits their risk and their interest. And I think by doing that and ignoring the data that is irrelevant, I think we will be more successful in our delivery of the interventions, but also I think we'll have better employee outcomes. And if all else fails, let's just get some of those private cabins installed at our head office. So, thank you very much.